Someone just kicked me out of the app. I have no idea why, but here I am. Someone post the link, please. That would be great. Post the link in the other chat. Get everyone back in here. I'm not going anywhere. Here I am. Here I am. Still got all your super chats. Anyway, as I was saying, can someone please post the link in the other chat? I feel like the USA is going to try to do what it did in 1978. It's going to try to create a situation where Russia and China and Iran, the US's geopolitical rivals, feel like they are obligated to send their military into Afghanistan. After the country is handed over to the Taliban, which seems to be the case right now, I feel like the next move is to then create so much instability that Iran, Russia, and China feel like they have to intervene. They're once again setting up an Afghan trap. Right? They're handing the country to the Taliban, it seems. They're not saying they're doing that. Right now they maintain they're going to keep supporting the Afghan government, but they're pulling everybody out. They're pulling everybody out. Everyone's getting out of there. The embassy, everybody. All the military. I mean, it looks to me like they're handing the country over to the Taliban. They've made a deal with the Taliban to make sure the Taliban will not be friendly to Russia or China or Iran. And then they're going to use the Taliban and possibly other forces in the country to provoke a situation where Russia and China and Iran feel like they have to intervene. And they'll set another Afghan trap. They realize that Afghanistan has been a drain on the United States. It has been a drain on the United States. The morale of the public, I mean, people don't support U.S. military interventions anymore. They want to end these wars. 73% of the public want us out of Afghanistan. It's been a drain on the United States. It's been a drain on the economy of the United States, on the public of the United States, on the credibility, the atrocities that come out, the images. You remember when U.S. soldiers were urinating on corpses? Remember how it came out there was a division of the U.S. military that was using the Nazi SS insignia? It's just been a drain. And they're strategically saying, okay, well, rather than have Afghanistan be a drain on us, why don't we have Afghanistan be a drain on Russia and China and Iran? And that's my thinking here. This is a giant chessboard, the grand chessboard that Brzezinski wrote about. And my feeling is that this is the United States is saying, okay, let's give Afghanistan. We've been talking to the Taliban for years to try and pull this off. We finally got the Taliban to agree to terms we want. We'll get the Taliban in there. And then we'll create a situation where Russia and China and Iran all feel like they have to drain their resources and their population and send their forces into Afghanistan. That's my thinking. Now we'll see. Because I can guarantee you the Taliban knows they're being used. Right? The Taliban are not exactly fans of the United States, not exactly fans of Russia, China, and Iran either. They consider Iran to be Shia apostates. They consider the Chinese to be atheistic communists. They consider the Russians to be their longtime enemy and Christian enemy. The Taliban is the Taliban. It's a group. It's a fanatical religious cult, basically. It's a Wahhabi religious cult. It's a breakaway from the Saudis, right? It's the Saudi army that was built to fight, led by Saudis. It's an Afghan breakaway, a more indigenously Afghan breakaway from the Saudi-led army in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. Right? The Taliban is their own thing. I mean, it's an Afghan thing, right? And let's be clear, Afghanistan, a lot of people will say that Afghanistan is the Middle East. It's not the Middle East, right? I mean, it's Central Asia. The Middle East is pretty far away. Yeah, there are Muslims there, but it's not the Middle East. Look at a map. That is not the Middle East. You're talking about Afghan diaspora wanting to sanction Pakistan. All right. And thank you, T-Mac, for the super chat. It's not the Middle East. It's Central Asia. And look, there's all day people have been making references to the very famous images of the USA pulling out of Saigon, right? There's a very famous image of that helicopter pulling out of Saigon and all the US allies trying to get on the helicopter to get out of Vietnam. A very famous image. People have been making reference to that image. Why? Let's go over what happened, right? So the USA was backing the, authoritarian military regime of South Vietnam against the Marxist government of North Vietnam. The Vietnamese people were fighting to reunify their country. The USA had troops in Vietnam for a long time. The war bogged down. The public didn't want to hear it. So finally, the USA was forced to pull its troops out of Vietnam. And after a couple years, the government of South Vietnam, the puppet government of the United States, collapsed. And Vietnam was reunified. And then, all the U.S. aligned forces, there's the famous image. They were, trying to get on, the helicopter because they knew they were going to be executed for their collaboration with the imperialists. And they knew that they were going to be punished for collaborating with the United States and occupying their country. So, all the Vietnamese collaborators were basically trying to get out of there as quickly as they could. There's a famous picture of the helicopter at the embassy. So, after that, right, 1975, Vietnam is reunified. In Cambodia, the government of Cambodia falls, the monarchy falls, and the communists of Cambodia come to power. That's the neighboring country, right? The USA has killed millions of people in Cambodia. Mass bombing. I mean, the USA bombed millions of people in Vietnam, kills like 4 or 5 million Vietnamese people. The USA is bombing Cambodia. Millions of Cambodians are killed. Mass death, right? Out of the chaos, the communists of Cambodia come to power. But the communists of Cambodia that come to power are divided into two factions. One faction of the Cambodian Communist Party are legit Marxist-Leninists. The other faction is led by a lunatic named Pol Pot. Pol Pot is an anarchist, right? He wants to go directly to communism. He believes in agrarian communism, meaning that you can build communism without industrialization, in poverty. And Pol Pot and his wing of the Cambodian Communist Party start exterminating and executing the legitimate communists of Cambodia. Plus, they begin going over the border and attacking villages in Vietnam. So Vietnam feels it has no choice but to intervene in Cambodia. And it's called the Kampuchea War, right? Because the name that Pol Pot gave Cambodia, he called it Democratic Kampuchea. And then China, which is aligned with the United States, announces that Vietnam, a puppet of the Soviet social imperialists, has been attacking Cambodia. So China invades Vietnam, supposedly to help protect Cambodia from the Vietnamese who are invading on behalf of the Soviet imperialists. There's a bloodbath. Right? Cambodian communists are being killed by other Cambodian communists. Okay. Don't expect it to work. New. Cambodian communists are killing other Cambodian communists. Vietnamese communists are being killed by Cambodian communists. Chinese communists are killing Vietnamese communists. Vietnamese communists are killing Cambodian communists. It's a big mess. It's a big war. All kinds of people are dying. Mass death, mass killing. And George W. Bush got up there and said, see, we never should have pulled out of Vietnam. Because look, things got worse, right? And then people that were trying to flee the violence and the killing, they were called boat people. And we heard all about boat people. Oh, look, the communists, we pulled out of Vietnam and look, things got worse. They're killing each other. Well, we now know that Pol Pot was backed by the United States. Let me repeat that. Pol Pot was backed by the United States. Pol Pot, the crazy ultra-left anarchist leader of Cambodia, was backed by the United States. The USA was giving him weapons and money and enabling him to come to power and kill. Saw you on Pro Democracy Pod. Oh, it was great. Alex is great. Mila is great. They're both great folks. Coming to power and kill the legitimate wing of his own party and attack Vietnam. The United States backed Pol Pot. So that whole debacle and the aftermath of the Vietnam War, the fighting that ensued afterwards, the Kampuchea War of 1978, that whole thing was set up by the United States. Manipulate the communists against each other, right? As Brzezinski wrote in his grand chessboard book, keep the barbarians killing each other. It was the strategy. That was the strategy. That was the strategy. The whole thing. We're going to pull out of Vietnam, but we got the Chinese communists fighting the Soviet communists. We got the Vietnamese communists fighting with Cambodian, and it'll be. And that bloodbath didn't last forever, mind you. It lasted a couple of years. The Kampuchea War was over in a couple of years, though. And after the Kampuchea War, the life expectancy in Vietnam started to rise. In 1980, when Vietnam finally had peace, no invasion from China, no invasion from Cambodia, when peace was finally set up in Vietnam, life expectancy started going up. Education was created, healthcare access, the Soviet Union was able to get in there. In fact, the first Asian in space was from Vietnam. It was a Vietnamese person who was able to go on a Soviet aircraft into outer space, or a Soviet spacecraft. And starting in 1980, when Vietnam had peace, its living standards went up. And so, yes, there was a big debacle in the immediate aftermath of the Vietnam War. And right-wingers will bring this up a lot. I remember, I was arguing with somebody. Somebody said, shouted at me, some right-winger, he shouted at me. He's like, yeah, the Vietnam War was bad, but, after America left, the communists went in there and they killed all kinds of people, and they killed Pol Pot, and they killed all these people, and nobody protested that. Well, it turns out that's because the United States set that whole thing up. They were funding Pol Pot. They were manipulating the Chinese communists against the Soviet communists. They set up the whole thing, right? And that lasted a couple years. And then after that, the standard of living in Vietnam has been rising ever since. So that whole thing, that whole narrative, but I feel like something like it hasn't even started yet. I mean, the USA hasn't even pulled out, and they're already playing this card. They're already saying, oh, look, this is what happens when the U.S. pulls out of countries. There's human rights violations. The country has been unstable, and people have been dying, and drug gangs have been getting stronger in Afghanistan for 19 years now. People have been dying. People have been fleeing the country. There's been mass death. And this has been going on for a long time. And the Taliban seems to have made some kind of arrangement with the United States. I am convinced, with all the negotiations going on between the USA and the Taliban, right, during the Trump administration, now continuing under the Biden administrations, with all these negotiations going on, I am convinced the USA would not be handing Afghanistan over to the Taliban like this unless there had been some kind of deal made. And I think a big part of that deal is keeping the minerals in the ground. Because I'll tell you what the United States doesn't want. Iran and China have a plan for Afghanistan called trade and transport. It would involve building railway through Afghanistan, enabling Afghans to get jobs, extract those minerals, work with Huawei Technologies and Chinese state-run companies, give Afghans real jobs in a real economy, not drugs and terrorism and such. Economic development, build railroads to give Afghanistan access to ocean ports so it could export its products. If Afghanistan could join the Belt and Road and the Eurasian Economic Union, there could be hope there. Afghanistan could become part of the emerging Eurasian economic development led by Russia and China. And that's what the United States does not want. That's what the United States is determined to prevent. It does not want to see a stable Afghanistan join with its neighbors in mutual economic development. That's what it's afraid of. The USA is afraid of seeing Afghanistan rise up from poverty. That's what it's afraid of. It wants an unstable Afghanistan. It wants chaos. It wants that chaos to spill over into Russia and China and Iran. And that's what the USA is really afraid of in Afghanistan. And I am already, the USA hasn't left Afghanistan yet, but they're already playing up look what happens, you anti-war people, you want us to pull out, look what happens when we pull out. They're already doing that. I haven't even left yet. But the USA is leaving after months of negotiations with the Taliban. But I must say, as bleak as this sounds, okay, we know what the USA is trying to do, all right? We don't know. We're speculating, right? They don't call me up and tell me. I'm the last person they would ever tell. I'm speculating about what I think our government is trying to do in Afghanistan. But the Taliban are not stupid. You got to give them credit. The Taliban, they might be crazy religious fanatics. They are not stupid. To not just get demolished at this point, to maintain the amount of territory they have for this long. The USA invaded 18 years ago, and the government that the USA, toppled is still there. Those are not idiots. Those are some people who know what they're doing. The Iranian government are not stupid. The Chinese government are definitely not stupid. The Russian government is not stupid. And I feel like if I'm just a guy sitting here in my Brooklyn apartment rambling into my iPhone about Afghanistan, and I could kind of sniff out what the United States is doing, I have a feeling that the Taliban and the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians are also pretty well onto it. So I'm not sure what's really going to happen here. I feel like the United States has its strategy. It will do its best to try and push forward its strategy. But Russia and China and Iran have their strategy. The Belt and Road, economic development, win-win cooperation, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Belt and Road Initiative. I feel like the Taliban has its own interest, right? They want to do, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Let me just put it that way. Let's see what happens. Because as much as the USA, I think, would like to see continued instability and chaos in Afghanistan, as much as the USA has been talking, the USA has been talking to the Taliban for a long time, and they didn't just do this on a whim. They didn't just go, we're getting out. No. There's been years of negotiations ahead of this. I've got a feeling I have got a feeling this is not necessarily a foregone conclusion. What happens next in Afghanistan is not exactly clear. And the balance of forces in the world is changing. Now, the USA would like to see China, Iran, and Russia get bogged down militarily in Afghanistan, because then that would weaken the ability of those countries to help out their friends in Nicaragua or Cuba or Iran. It would force them to focus on instability closer to home, on a direct military threat. It would enable the United States to escalate its military operations in other parts of the world, with Russia, China, and Iran dealing with Afghanistan. So we'll just have to see. We don't really know what will pan out. But I will tell you the narrative we're getting from U.S. media is reprehensible. U.S. media covered up mutualism. U.S. media has covered up and downplayed so many of the atrocities and crimes of this war, so many of the real costs, the financial burden this war has put on the U.S. public. And now the USA hasn't even pulled out yet, and they're already playing the game. U.S. media has turned into the war lobby. They're demanding Joe Biden be more hawkish. Every question is, how are you sure you're not being hawkish enough? Are you sure? Everything is framed up in this pro-war, humanitarian interventionist, pro-militarist, anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, anti-Iran way. Everything's framed up that way. So I expect to be more disappointed by American media. But I also am not sure what will happen yet. I don't think the USA has good intentions, but I also think they don't exactly know what they're doing. So on that note, folks, names and locations, and thank you, Poncho, for the super chat. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you, names and locations. All right. China didn't support Maoists. War. All righty. All right. Who do we got here? All right, I'm just going to roll it back. All right, Nadia from East Harlem, New York City. Adelaide, Australia. Tom the Lurker in Minneapolis. Fairhope, Alabama. Ryan in Oakland, New Jersey. Cincinnati, Ohio. Shia in Montreal. Luke from Mississippi. Calgary, Canada. Orange Juice. Temple City, California. Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. Springfield, Missouri, USA. Zachary in Seattle. Nassau County, Char darling. Welcome. Cleveland Pirate Alex. KCMO. Jeff, Grand Canyon, Arizona. Milos in Poland. Matt in Alamo City. Vancouver, Canada. Alaska, NYC, Chicago. Isan from Iran. Eddie from Houston. Santa Clarita stands with Caleb. San Angelo Solidarity is in the house. Great folks. Clydebank. West Virginia. Robert from Hawaii. Southern California. Wisconsin. Vinicius from Brazil. Ontario, Canada. Tokyo, Japan. Mindanao to Midwest. That's Lumpia Logic, good friend of the program. I think you can become a mod, Lumpia. You're now a mod. All right, use your powers wisely. Melbourne, Australia. Glendale, Canada. Auckland, New Zealand. Joanne from the Netherlands. Poncho. Kolkata, India. Robert from Hawaii. Boone in North Carolina. Pomona, California. Mo. Sacramento. JT24 in Mississippi. Melbourne, Australia. Martin in Ireland. Hello, Caleb from the Philippines. Andy in Puerto Rico. Tesla, Long Beach. Southern California, West Virginia, the Ragin' Cajun Woodlands, Arturo in Alaska, Placerville, Ash from Chicago, Sam Scheller from San Diego County, Virginia, Venezuela, Mexico, Traverse City, Michigan, Google not a verb, California, Fred, Balthazar, St. Louis, Brazil, Sam in Australia, Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati, Evansville, Indiana. Nicholas Lynch says, dare to struggle, dare to win. Lily is with us. She's a John Brown volunteer. Atlanta, Georgia. Dan Tyuman. All right, Samuel from Chicago. Naples, Florida. There you go. Trans Marxist, who I have retweeted several times. Kendall in San Diego. Alrighty, folks, and if you haven't seen the great video about the John Brown Volunteers, an excellent group of people, just an excellent group of people, who are doing great work, go and check out. It's the last video on the program. If you can shoot them a donation, that would be awesome, because they are struggling to keep moving ahead, struggling to keep moving forward, but they are doing it. They are a full-time outreach team. They need your support. And if you are young or old and you have the free time and you want to, give your life to this, I think you should consider becoming a John Brown volunteer. The Center for Political Innovation is a think tank. We have gatherings around the country. We publish books. We're going to be having more in real life events as pandemic restrictions are lifted. But the John Brown volunteers, they're like the elite core of the Center for Political Innovation. They are the full-time outreach team, right? They are the people who are they are the cadre, if you will, of the organization. They are the boots on the ground. They're the solid core at the Center for Political Innovation. They are the center of the Center for Political Innovation. That's who they are. And so if you want to become a John Brown volunteer, I think you should do it. I mean, if you're unemployed or if you don't have a lot of commitments or whatever, and you want to, now is the time. You're young, you're in the prime of your youth, and you're ready to go to socialism. You're ready to give your life to the revolution. By all means, sign up. Now is the time to sign up. That now is the time to do it. I see Benjamin asking about forming a CPI study group in his area. Well, if you want to shoot me an email, I can help you to do that. I can give you a bulk rate on the manual, and I can help you to form one, Ben. So shoot me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. And we're doing it, folks. We're doing it. The Center for Political Innovation, the city building tendency is taking off. So there you go. Let's keep moving ahead. So I have a lot of super chats to get through, but that is appreciated, right? You give me a super chat, I'll give you an answer. Keep them rolling in. And let's roll into the second half of the show. All right. What is the best physical editions of Lenin's work? I was able to get my hands on an incomplete Lenin set, right? There was a political group I was in, and they had like 2 Lenin sets at their office. And then they had an old one that was in boxes and was missing some editions. So they gave me the old one when they didn't have office space for it anymore. And then I didn't have space for it in my apartment, so I gave it to a friend. I used to have a Lenin set. Progress Publishers, which was the publishing house that published Soviet books in the United States. They did publish the complete works of Lenin. Not cheap, cost like $300 or something, but I was able to get my hands on part of it, basically. An incomplete Lenin set that was going to be thrown away that I was able to get my hands on. But honestly, those old books from Progress Publishers, they're not the best. I mean, they're old, and, those books I had were moldy and old, and, best physical edition. I don't know. I mean, the Chinese foreign language press, they have those editions of Lenin's writings. Those tend to be pretty good. All right, Hating America, Synthetic Left. All right, those tend to be pretty good. The Chinese editions, they tend to be decent. There's also some U.S. edited versions, right, that you can get. They usually have a bad introduction. International publishers, I've found, they tend to have very good editions of Lenin's writings. International publishers is probably the best you can get, I would argue, right? Their editions of State and Revolution and What Is to Be Done, those tend to be the best. International publishers, they're a little bare bones. They don't have big, long introductions. But look, my hope with the Center for Political Innovation is that we can republish some of these non-copyrighted Marxist texts. I mean, we've done the Green Book. That's not a Marxist text, but it's a socialist, anti-imperialist text. We've done the Green Book already. Bill Clinton's Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs was called Lady Taliban for lobbying a Unicol pipeline in Afghanistan with Taliban after Gorbachev betrayed. All right. Lady Taliban Clinton administration. All righty. So there you go. But yeah, International Publishers has like the best English editions, I think. They don't have big, long introductions, but there you go. How do you convince Americans to support Fusion City when so many people are tied to the oil and gas industry? Well, you make clear to them that fusion energy is going to happen, and it's a question of whether it happens in a competitive way. Um, that's one thing. And you also point out that this is part of what it means to be, this is the good side of America, that we want to be part of historical progress and breakthroughs. The idea of Fusion City, that Fusion City is to be an international facility, an international combined effort to get fusion energy, and all the scientists of the world being flown into the heartland of the United States. Um, and it would be a joint international effort, like a little UN, an international territory created in the heartland of America, for the purpose of getting the world off of fossil fuels, fusion energy. There's a lot of awareness in the United States about climate change. There's a lot of awareness in the United States about China's great strides in fusion energy, and it would be a way that we could not make it a competition. It would be a way to revive the go-get-em, motor-mindedness American spirit, not for greed, not for profits and racism and exploitation, but instead to make scientific breakthroughs and rescue the human race. Imagine how different the world would be if we had fusion energy. Just think about it. If you really step back and think about it, a world without a petroleum-based economy, a world with fusion energy, if you think about the implications of that, I mean, it would be a world of vast material abundance. I'll tell you that much. A lot of our material woes in this world, a lot of the concerns we're having, fusion energy, that higher energy source, it would be quite a different world, not just geopolitically, but our everyday lives would change. We would be it would be a high-tech leap. It would be a high-tech leap if we were to get beyond fossil fuels to fusion energy. Let me just put it that way. All right. Was Ceausescu in Romania corrupt? I don't know if corrupt is the right word, but he was leading Romania, an underdeveloped country that, historically had been kept poor. And under his leadership, there were lots of hospitals and lots of schools in Romania, wiped out illiteracy, industrialized the country. But at the same time, it was an authoritarian state. They were under attack. They were, barricaded by the West. And then in the 80s, the USA loaned money to Romania. There was distance between Romania and the Soviet Union politically, and Romania got into debt to American banks, and so they had a lot of austerity. Ceausescu was certainly a flawed leader. Now, polls show people in Romania say life was better under Ceausescu than it is now under capitalism. The rate of crime was far lower. The rate of poverty and, unemployment, sex trafficking, drug addiction, a lot of the horrors of the free market have been restored. But at the same time, there were big problems. It was a very authoritarian state. I do know, and the Ceausescu was also quite socially conservative. He outlawed abortion, and that, that there were some criticisms. So there you go. All righty. Dugan says America is the Antichrist. I mean, okay, ask Dugan about that. I'm not Dugan. I've met Dugan. I respect him as a political scientist in Russia. He is a traditionalist conservative, an old believer, Orthodox nationalist in Russia. I am a leftist and a Marxist anti-imperialist in the United States. So, ask Dugan about that, right? I mean, as someone who is an anti-imperialist and opposes, the Western domination of the global economy, he sees things in a geopolitical framework, right, where he sees this as the Atlanticist system and Western liberalism, and he's against it. So it doesn't surprise me that as a deeply religious man, he would probably frame that in biblical term and probably, probably, see that in terms of the book of Revelations. So there you go. All right. Was Soviet policy toward the kulaks justified? Well, what policy are you referring to, right? Because you'll remember at first, right, kulak means rich peasant, right? The word kulak in Russian just means fist. Did you know that? It means fist, right? And kulaks were called fists because they were known, they were peasants who were wealthy enough to hire other peasants, and they were notorious for beating their employees, using their fists on them. If you didn't do what they wanted, they punched you, and they were They were big, mean guys who were wealthy enough and had big farms, and they pushed around the other peasants who weren't rich enough to have their own territory. That's what kulak actually literally means fist, right? Now, during the Russian Civil War, the policy of the Soviet Union was they nationalized all land. It was called war communism, and all land was nationalized to be part of the military effort. Okay. All right, younger folks, increasing negativity. All right, very good. Wrote it down. That's that's what the word means. And after the Russians, when the Russian Civil War was going on, they nationalized all land. It was war communism. All land was nationalized in the process of making, of defeating the White Army and the invaders. It was after the Russian Civil War that they launched the new economic policy. And during the new economic policy, the kulaks were encouraged to let their private farms flourish. And in fact, the Soviet government even had a slogan. They said, "Peasant, enrich yourself." And they were encouraging and actually helping kulaks to have private farms. And then, 1931, you had the collectivization, where they transitioned very rapidly to collective farming. There was a famine. There were food shortages, and in response, the military was sent to the countryside, and there was the collectivization, and it was forced collectivization. It wasn't voluntary collectivization, but the military set up the collective farm system, and that was pretty bad. I mean, it was pretty drastic, and it was a pretty awful process, right? And then after that, there were no kulaks, right? After that, they had collective farming. Right? They had, then they had some state farms in the USSR that were run like state-run factories. But most of the farms in the Soviet Union were collective farms, meaning that they got paid per item. That they would sell their agricultural products to the state, and the state would pay them for the amount of, if there was a wheat, they're growing wheat, they would get paid per wheat. You produce this much wheat, you get this much money from the state. And that's how it worked. Yeah, I mean, I don't know which of those. I mean, I'm sure there are ways they could have done it better. And I mean, when you actually read the history there, right? How the Soviet Union during the early 20s, it was barricaded, and the USA, it was a blockade, and people were starving, and look, until the Soviet Union came along, they didn't even have tractors on Soviet farms. Until Stalin came along, they didn't have tractors. They didn't have mechanized agriculture. They didn't have electricity in rural areas. So, yes, there were many things that were done during the collectivization that I'm sure if you looked back on that policy, you would say they shouldn't have done it that way. They should have done it differently. Yeah, I mean, there are many ways of looking looking back on the process of how they created the Soviet agricultural system. And you could say that, look, if they could do it again, they would do it differently. They'd do it more slowly. They'd do it more voluntarily. They wouldn't zig and zag. At first, it's peasant, enrich yourself. One day you like private agriculture, and the next day you're like using the military to abolish private agriculture. Look, it was sloppy, it was messy, but again, the Soviet Union was barricaded and surrounded. They didn't have a moment of peace. They were struggling to build socialism, surrounded by the threats and attacks of capitalism, anticipating the Nazi invasion and the rise of fascism. And, they didn't have there was not a normal year in the Soviet Union. Right? There wasn't a normal year, right? People look back at this last year and say, oh, with the lockdowns, the pandemic, it wasn't a normal year. Soviet Union never had a normal year, right? There was World War II, there was collectivization, there was the blockade, there was, that's one point Michael Parenti makes, is when you talked to Soviet economists, they said, there is no such thing as a normal year in the Soviet Union. Every year there was something going on, some crisis they had to manage. And so the fact that they accomplished everything they did, they created a modern agricultural system. They wiped out illiteracy. They invented space travel. They raised millions of people from poverty. They built so many universities. They electrified the country. I mean, what the Soviet Union accomplished, despite everything they're up against, is nothing short of a miracle. And that's what I take from it. And I don't sit there and go over every decision and every policy. Look, Look, we don't, there's a lot of literature that just goes out of its way to demonize the Soviets like they're the most evil, maniacal people you ever heard of. But, you know, again, they were pioneers. No one had ever done that before. No socialist country had ever existed before. But they accomplished amazing things despite being up against the most extreme, incredible odds. What they accomplished is not, and what I take from the Soviet experience is that we don't have to have capitalism. If they can accomplish all of that in the face of so much opposition, imagine what we could accomplish here if we had a socialist government in the United States, right? So I take from the Soviet experience, it's worth studying, it's worth learning from, but no one's wanting to copy that. No one's wanting to sit there and say that everything they did was exactly right. No, we take what we can, we learn what we can, we study all of it, we blindly follow none of it. All right, Naddle-fed. Look, honestly, I have never met anyone from the National Labor Federation. Okay, this is a small political group in the United States that it's a communist group, and they're very secretive, but they operate through some labor organizing fronts. I have never met anyone from the group ever. I have no direct experience with that group. Never have I ever had any direct experience with that group. None. And the group is pretty widely smeared on the internet. Or I shouldn't say smeared. I don't know. These things could be true, right? There's a lot of negative information about them on the internet. There's a massive amount of negative information. I did at one point meet several people. There were people I worked with politically that were in a communist group I used to be in that had been in Naddle-fed and told me some very negative things. But honestly, you know what? There's a lot of people all over the internet who say nasty, negative things about me. And the things they say are not true, or they're half-truths and exaggerations. There's people I used to work with, I don't work with anymore, and they say negative things about me, some of which are blatantly false, some of which have a grain of truth in them. Yeah, and so I don't know. I have no direct experience with the National Labor Federation, with the Provisional Communist Party. I don't really know anything about what they're really like. And I don't want to get into this. I don't like this culture of everyone shit-talking everybody else, right? If there's a political position that the National Labor Federation takes that I disagree with, I would be happy to rattle off why I think they're wrong about that. But I don't know what their positions are. They're extremely secretive. From what I understand, it's a group that operates secretly. They operate secretly. They run, I think, the Eastern Farm Workers Association and the Eastern Service Workers Association and the California Homemakers Association. They're a secretive group. They operate some like labor union, community, charity organizations or something. And what they actually believe about socialism and communism is very hard to find out because they keep it very secretive. And they do kind of labor, community, charity work, and they're very, very secretive in how they operate. And, that's all I know. Like I said, there's a huge amount of negative information about them, but, I don't know much about it. So, again, I want us to get away from the shit-talking culture. I really do. I want us to get away from the I hate you, you're a cult, no, you're a cult, no, you're a sect, no, you're a sect, no, you're a Stalinist, no, you're a Trotsky. Let's get away from that, right? If there was a political position they put forward that I disagreed with, I could tell you about it. But as far as this whole thing, I just, why do they exist? I assume they exist because there are a lot of people in the group who believe in what it stands for and think that whatever they're doing is helping to build communism. Now, there's obviously a lot of former members who feel like the group is not doing that and is playing a negative role. And, I just have no direct experience with this organization. When I first met people who had been in it, I remember my jaw dropped. I'm like, whoa, because I'd read about Naddle-fed on the internet. I'd never met anyone who actually was part of it. So there you go. So there you go. I want us to take things to a higher plane. Stoicism in Rome and its impact today. Well, the modern incarnation of Christianity is very much influenced by Roman Stoicism, right? The philosopher Seneca was one of the main Roman Stoicist voices. And so here's what you have to remember about Rome. Here's Roman Stoicism. Let me just take a drink of unnamed orange beverage. I'm going to switch to water after this because it's got less sugar. But, all right, so what's the founding myth of the Roman Empire? What's the founding myth? The founding myth of the Roman Empire is that, Romulus and Remus, two twin boys, were abandoned by their father by the river, left to die, right? Their father, their mother had the baby, and in the ancient world, that was very common. Infanticide was a routine practice in the ancient world, right? In Rome, and this happened throughout the Roman Empire. This happened in Greece. This happened in Egypt. This happened in Mesopotamia. It was a routine practice throughout the ancient world. It's horrifying. But, men owned women. Women were property. Women gave birth. And then the father of the household would determine if he wanted to keep the baby or not. And if the baby was deformed in any way, if the baby, he didn't have enough money, couldn't take care of the baby, they didn't have enough crops or whatever, they just got rid of the baby. And they would rip the baby out of the mother's arms and throw it in the woods or throw it in the river or something like that. It's a really horrendous thing. And that's how different the ancient world really was, okay? The ancient world was a much more brutal and ugly place than we can imagine, right? Nowadays, you couldn't imagine, ripping a newborn baby out of a mother's arms and throwing it in the woods or throwing it in the river. That just sounds like one of the most horrendous things you could imagine, right? It's a horrendous thing, but that was routinely done in the ancient world, right? Scarcity. When you're at that level of scarcity, that level of poverty, society is very brutal. And in ancient Rome, the legend is that Romulus and Remus, two twin boys, they were for whatever reason, their mother gave birth to the two twins. The father didn't want them, so he just dumped them by the river. Instead of dying, they were raised by a she-wolf. A female wolf came along and nursed them. And they were raised by wolves rather than being raised by adults or humans. They were raised by wolves, and wolves are not weighed down by primitive human compassion. Wolves are ruthless predators that are strong. Because they were raised by wolves, they became mighty, big, strong, ruthless conquerors, right? That's basically the legend of Romulus and Remus. They became, because they were not raised by soft, caring humans, but raised by wild predators. It's like Superman or something. It's like I don't know. I mean, this didn't happen. Okay, this is a legend, right? It doesn't work that way. Wolves don't raise human babies. That doesn't happen. So it's just a made up story. But the idea is that Romulus and Remus, they gained superpowers or something. I mean, they didn't gain magical powers, but they became big, strong, ruthless guys because they were raised by wolves. And so they built a mighty empire, and then one of the brothers killed the other brother. I think Romulus, who Rome is named after, he killed Remus at one point, and he became the first Roman leader or something. And that was very much the Roman perspective. Rome was all about might is right. Rome was all about strength and all of that. And the Roman Empire, as it got, it was a republic. You have to remember, it was a republic. It was an elected government. Some vague notion of democracy. You had the hereditary Senate, all the landowners. The people that were the top landowners were senators, and they voted in a Senate. And then you had an assembly, like a national assembly, where the citizenry voted. You had two houses, right? Kind of like our Congress and House of Representatives, except the Senate was hereditary and the National Assembly was elected. And you had the Roman Republic. And the reason it was a republic, it was not because the Romans they believed in democracy or whatever. It was because that was a way to motivate. It was a way to motivate the public to support the wars. Because again, if there's just one king and everyone just has to go along with what he says, they're less likely to support it. But if every landowner gets to have a vote and they get to discuss who they're going to go to war with and they get to negotiate, who divides up the loot, it was a way of motivating the public to support the wars. So as the city of Rome was becoming an empire, the fact that they voted was a way to motivate them to do it. It was built on slavery. It was a slave empire, right? And, and they were constantly expanding. That was Rome. And, this went on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as this went on for hundreds of years, right, the Roman public started to get weary of this. right? And they, again, they had the gladiatorial shows, psyching up the Roman public to support the wars. And, they had all these things, but the Roman public grew weary of this, right? And your typical Roman was a hedonist, meaning that they thought pleasure was the highest good. But as the hedonist, as the Roman public got sick of the wars, and sick of, you had a trend of the Stoicist philosophers who emerged. And they were the other extreme, right? The Roman Empire was all about plunder and loot and wealth. And so you had the Stoicists that came in and said the simple life is good, right? The Roman Empire, your typical, Roman was a hedonist who was all about pleasure. Well, the Stoicists came in there and they said it's not about pleasure, it's the opposite, and that the Stoicists would often, engage in behavior that you might describe as masochistic. They would whip themselves, flog themselves, cut themselves, right, to give themselves enlightening experience, right? Well, most Romans worshipped, the typical established gods, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, whatever. The Stoicists often worshipped Isis from Egypt, or they had different gods that they worshipped from around the empire, Mithra from Persia, or they had different cults they were importing into the country. So, and as Rome continued, after the fall of the Roman Republic, the empire, the emperors came in, Rome gradually became more and more Stoic. And, a lot of the phrases in the Bible that are attributed to Jesus were said hundreds of years before Jesus was born by Roman Stoic philosophers, okay? As ye sow, so shall ye reap. That's attributed to Jesus, but actually there were Stoic philosophers that said that, So the question is, did Jesus say it and Jesus heard it from somebody else? Or did when the Bible was being written, somebody attributed it to Jesus, but it was actually something that some Roman said? We don't know, okay? But there's a lot of, little like bits of wisdom, little sayings, right? That are attributed to all kinds of different religions and stuff. You can trace them back to the Roman Stoic philosophers, and they were just, there were many of them, right? And, many people have pointed out that a lot of these Roman Stoic philosophers and a lot of the cults, the Stoic cults of Rome, have similar stories to the founding of Christianity, right? That there are similar, the days, big days in the life of Jesus, align with big days in the life of various philosophers. That's all true. So there you go. All right. Alrighty. How do you respond to those who say that the Russian Revolution was not a real proletarian revolution? Well, I would say to them, there's never been a real proletarian revolution in the sense that Karl Marx meant it. There's never been, the Western worker, in Europe, the factory worker rises up and seizes his factory. That never happened, right? Lenin wrote this whole book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, explaining that the revolution would happen in the developing world, and it would be whole nations fighting for their freedom. The world has changed. There has never been the real proletarian revolution in the Marxist sense. It has always been whole countries breaking out of imperialism, the proletariat entering an alliance with the peasantry, entering an alliance even with anti-imperialist capitalists, a united front under the leadership of communists. So, read Lenin. Read Lenin. All right, El Salvador. Honestly, my understanding of El Salvador is that despite being a leftist government, there haven't been any real, it's not like Nicaragua where there have been real concrete changes. That El Salvador is very poor, the drug gangs are a big problem in the country, and that despite, the FMLN being sympathetic to Venezuela and Cuba and all that, they haven't been able to really take concrete action, right? They were a guerrilla group at one point, and then they became a political party, and they're considered leftists and such, but they haven't been able to implement policies in the way that other socialist governments throughout Latin America have. All right, why am I anti-degrowth? Capitalism is a cancer of uncontrolled growth. No, it's not. Okay, and this is what you don't understand. That's neoliberalism right there. Capitalism is not uncontrolled growth. The problem with capitalism is that growth creates poverty. Under capitalism, the more abundance you have, the poorer everybody gets. Under capitalism, people are homeless, not because there's not enough housing, because there's too much housing. Under capitalism, people are hungry, not because there's not enough food, because there's too much food. Under capitalism, efficiency and technological progress leads to greater poverty. That's the problem with capitalism, okay? So if you think the problem with capitalism is that it creates unlimited growth, you're smoking some Milton Friedman, Adam Smith, Friedrich von Hayek, no. Capitalism leads to monopolies and the centralization of wealth in the hands of a few, which then creates monopolistic stagnation. Capitalism creates overproduction. Capitalism has the natural problem of the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Capitalism does not create unlimited growth, and that's the problem with it, right? The problem with capitalism is that even though humans are doing things that have never been done before, we have the most efficient, machines and computers, we still have mass poverty because under capitalism, technological progress and material abundance lead to poverty. The worker cannot buy back what he produces, and you have a glut of overproduction. So I'm anti-degrowth because I think that the reason I want socialism is so we can overcome this problem, so that technological progress is no longer restrained by the irrationality of greed and profits, so that humans and their creativity can soar, and all the artificial restrictions on human creativity and abundance that are imposed by the market system can be lifted. That's the idea. So degrowth is the opposite, right? Degrowth is saying, oh, we just want everyone to be poorer. No, we want to unleash the forces so that we can all be rich, right? So that humanity can no longer be restrained and poverty can be overcome, and we can get to a society with abundance enough to eradicate inequality and the need for the state. Yes, we need, socialism lays the basis for creating a post-scarcity society. So there you go. All right. Falun Gong, U.S. connections. I don't know who that is, Jay Grimes. I just don't know that name. The Falun Gong is a religious cult in China. It's mainly in the United States. I don't think they have much of a presence in China anymore. It started in China. In the 80s, there was kind of a movement of people in China that were interested in mystical rituals to improve their health and such. And when the Chinese Communist Party started to crack down on it, you got the rise of the Falun Gong. In the 1990s, when the internet was new, they used the internet to organize their movement. The Chinese government started censoring the internet in response to it. They run Epoch Times newspaper, which is an anti-China communist, anti-communist propaganda newspaper tied to the Trump administration, and they're big supporters of Trump, which is hilarious because they were big supporters of Obama before. But yeah, they really like Trump and they really, hate China, and they claim that their organs are being harvested, and that's been debunked so many times. That's not happening. They're just whatever. That's the Falun Gong. Yeah. All right, what can we learn from John Brown? Well, John Brown was all about solidarity. He was all about solidarity, and with his Christian faith, he, became an anti-racist and a revolutionary. And his Christian faith motivated him to take acts of great bravery in opposition to slavery. Another thing you can learn from John Brown is John Brown kept it simple. He kept it simple. John Brown was not wasn't complicated. When they would ask John Brown why he was opposed to slavery and why he did everything he did, he had a very simple answer, right? Not a complex answer. He would say, John Brown, many times throughout his life, people asked him, why are you so obsessed with ending slavery? And he said, because I believe in the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if I was a slave, I would want someone to fight for me to be free. So it's my obligation to fight for the slaves to be free, because you should do unto others as you should have them do unto you. That's not really very complicated, right? It's pretty simple. It's pretty straight to the point. But that was John Brown. And he risked, he fought in Kansas. There was like a statewide civil war. He fought in Kansas against pro-slavery militias. And then he went to Harper's Ferry, and he seized the U.S. Armory at Harper's Ferry, and and he eventually was executed. So he was a hero. And in fact, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, one of the most patriotic songs in the United States, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." that song that was actually originally it was originally it was originally John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. It was a marching song that soldiers sang to honor John Brown, the great, the great anti-slavery revolutionary. Right. All right. Difference between MLM and Maoism. And it was a song in honor of John Brown. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. And so, because they didn't want people marching into battles singing a song about somebody the U.S. government had executed, they rewrote the words to the tune, and that became the battle hymn of the Republic. You know, Glory, Glory, Hallelujah, all of that was originally just a song. It was like a drinking song, like a campfire song soldiers sang in honor of John Brown. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. And so they rewrote it to make it this patriotic hymn so that people wouldn't be singing John Brown's body. All right. Iran joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Not surprisingly, not surprising at all. I mean, Iran is an anti-imperialist country. China is an anti-imperialist country. They want to see economic development in Eurasia. They want, they want peace through countries trading with each other. So there you go. Poppy fields fund the opioid epidemic. Well, okay, there's truth in that. What is this? Okay. There's truth in this, in that the price of heroin. I'm not going to do that, Constantine. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that to the audience. Nice try. I'm not an orator, and I'm not going to do that to the audience. But I'm not a singer. I am an orator, but I'm not a musician. So that would just not be fair. The poppy fields of Afghanistan, the price of heroin has vastly gone down because of abundance. Because there is much more heroin in the world because of Afghanistan. Right? Because of the Afghan poppy fields, the amount of heroin in the world has increased, and so the price of heroin has gone down. Most of the heroin in the United States that we get is from Mexico, right? Because Afghanistan's pretty far away. I mean, there is Afghan heroin in the United States. There is Afghan heroin in the United States. And I believe over half of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan. However, in the United States, while it has driven the price of it down and made cheap heroin, heroin a lot cheaper to buy, so that's contributed to it. And I mean, it's made the amount of heroin in the world go up by a huge amount. Most of the heroin we get in the United States is from Mexico. And on top of that, most of the heroin in the United States is not heroin. From what I understand, fentanyl. Fentanyl is fake heroin. It's like synthetic heroin. You can cook it up in your home if you just get the right chemicals, right? And then a lot of people, because they don't want to ship in poppies and stuff, a lot of the heroin in the United States that people buy is not actually heroin. It's fentanyl. And fentanyl is much more dangerous, right? I mean, heroin is dangerous. But fentanyl is much more dangerous than heroin. So there you go. All right, depression rates in socialist countries. Honestly, I don't know enough about it. I mean, I can tell you a couple things that I know. The World Happiness Index gave Nicaragua, the socialist country of Nicaragua, the highest happiness rate of any country in the world in 2016. That's a UN, study they do, the World Happiness Index, where they study countries for the rate of happiness. And they said Nicaragua, the socialist government of Nicaragua, led by the Sandinistas, had the highest rate of happiness of any country in the world. That said, I do know that in China, the suicide rate is pretty high. And that's partly cultural, right? In China, there is a cultural, the culture doesn't condemn suicide as much as it does. And that there are circumstances in the culture in China and in other Asian countries like Korea and Japan and such. There is in some Asian cultures, it's more acceptable to kill oneself than it is in Western culture. Yeah, I mean, and that's unfortunate. And I know the Chinese government has worked very hard to try and drive down the suicide rate. So I don't I mean, I don't know about all of that, right? I mean, I just told you Nicaragua has a very happy, a high rate of happiness according to the UN. I've told you that some, socialist countries do have more problems with suicide, and that part of that is cultural. So I'm just telling you what I know. Best word of advice I ever got, someone said, don't say anything you don't know. But when you do know something, don't be afraid to say it. So I'm not saying anything I don't know there, but when I do know something, I'm saying it. Is the Afghan Shia, are they going to form a breakaway state? I don't know enough about Afghan Shia. I know there's a lot of Shia in Pakistan. I know Iran has a Shia government, but I don't know about Afghan Shia. I think the overwhelming majority in Afghanistan are Sunni. So I don't really know enough about Shia in Afghanistan. I'm sure there are plenty. I mean, there are some at least because of Iran and because of the region. I mean, I'm sure there are Shia in Afghanistan, but I just don't know enough about it. Did Lukashenko continue socialism in Belarus? Yeah, there was no counter-revolution in Belarus. The Soviet system was not dismantled. They didn't have shock therapy economics. I mean, it's corrupt. They have problems, but it's a state-run economy. The Communist Party is the biggest political party. The Soviet industries still exist. There was no counter-revolution in Belarus. There's a very good book on Belarus. It's called The Last Soviet Republic. It's very good by Stuart. What is it? It's a very good book, and I'm rereading it because of all the problems in Belarus and the USA putting sanctions on them and all that. DPRK, Malthusian. I don't know why they're making that allegation. I assume that that's related to the fact, some of the allegations that we hear about the way disabled people are treated in North Korea or something like that. But, DPRK is Marxist. Marxism is very much part of their official ideology, and Marxism is contrary to Malthusianism. Right? Marxism says that the Malthusian teaching that you need to reduce the human population is inconsistent, and Marxian economics rejects Malthusian economics. Number one, and number two, the DPRK has been working relentlessly to raise the level of productive forces and raise living standards and stuff. Malthusian perspective, if you read the principle, what is it, the essay on the principle of population, it's all about how do we make the population poorer and drive down the life expectancy, drive down the population, so court the return of the plague. You can read what he said. So, the policies of the DPRK government, that's not their intention. So I don't know what they're getting at there. Afghan diaspora wanting to sanction Pakistan. And well, I know that there's a big section of the Afghan public that does blame the Pakistani secret services for a lot of their problems, right? And it's true that, going back to the 80s, the Afghan secret police, the Pakistani secret police were heavily involved in the drug trade in Afghanistan and smuggling weapons to the anti-Soviet forces, and the Pakistan-Afghan border, there's a lot of bad stuff that goes over that border, and it's not a very policed border, right? From what I understand, it's quite easy to walk across the Pakistan-Afghan border, right? There's no big giant wall, and the mountains in Pakistan, it's very much no, there's very little authority there, right? The rural areas, it's very very it's very underdeveloped. Let me put it that way. All right. You don't expect the new Afghan trap to work. Well, like I said, I told you what I think the USA is trying to do. The USA wants, to rather than have its own forces in Afghanistan, have Afghanistan become the problem of Iran, Russia, and China. But at the same time, Russia and China and Iran know that. They know that. So there you go. I don't know what mutualism is. Is it's just like collective ownership of businesses, worker co-ops? Is that what that is? Well, I have a pretty strong critique of that I've written before. As long as profits are in command, it's still capitalism. Mutual aid, the idea that we should provide services to people, I think that's a good thing. It's a form of solidarity. But at the same time, we should be demanding, the state to take action for the people too. It's not an either or. You get some forces that say we want mutual aid, so we don't want the government to help people out. No, we do want the government. We do want to make demands on the government, but part of building a movement, a working class movement, is providing services to people and enabling each other to survive, real material solidarity. All right. Why did China not support the Maoists in the Nepal Civil War? Because the Maoists in Nepal during the Nepal Civil War were not supporting China. That's first of all, they declared the Chinese government were revisionists at that point, and that they were waging like a rural people's war in Nepal, and China borders Nepal, and China has to do business with Nepal. So, if China needs to do business with Nepal and they're funding a violent insurgency, in the country, that's not going to work now, is it? China's a country. They have to do business with people. They have to, and I mean, I'm sorry, okay, do you think Mexico would do business with the United States if the United States was arming a group of people that were waging a civil war to overthrow the Mexican government? Do you think the Mexican government would just say to the United States, "Okay, let's do business. You keep funding those folks." China's a country; it needs to survive. And did now that the Maoists joined the government, right, when the king was overthrown and the seven parties took over, right? You had the seven-party alliance that took over, and now the communists of Nepal have merged into one party, and the many of the former rural people's war, Maoists that were waging civil war in the countryside, many of them now support the Chinese government and have changed their view. So, but yes, I mean, again, the Comintern, the Communist International, that's the past, and I don't think communist parties should be operating that way. So there you go. Is hating America synthetic left? Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's weird, but there is this weird like memo that's been sent out in leftist circles that like you should never invoke American patriotism. You should never talk about the legacy of American revolutionaries like John Brown or Harriet Tubman or Abraham Lincoln, or William Z. Foster or Gus Hall, and that's a shame. It's part of this whole like not building a mass movement, trying to build this isolated bohemian fringe, and you sit around and talk about how revolutionary. I'm so revolutionary. I'm not an American. I might be born here. I might be a U.S. citizen, but I'm not an American, man. I'm so revolutionary. Oh, look at you. And there's a lot of people that again, it's about posturing, I think. And that, look, I mean, one of the people who's the most, quote unquote, anti-American, quote unquote, I mean, I put that in quotes because that doesn't mean anything. When I was a kid, I'd be arguing with my dad about politics, and he'd say, "You hate America." And I'd be like, "No, can you tell me what America is?" "Well, it's America." And I'd say, "Yeah, but what is America?" "You hate America." I'd be like, "Yeah, but what is America? I can't, if you have to tell me what it is before I can tell you if I hate it or not." "Well, you're liking communism, so you must hate America." "Yes, but what is America?" You could never tell me what America was, but somehow because I was liking communism, I was hating America. So it's this dumb thing. It's just part of the stupid jingoism that we get in this country, right? If you like any anti-imperialist country like Iran or Venezuela, then you quote unquote hate America, and then that's something you're not supposed to do because then you hate America. And what is America? I don't know. But that said, there is this kind of posturing. There's a lot of posturing. I'm that's right. I do hate America. Yeah. Yeah, America's genocide and slavery. I'm a super revolutionary. It's like, okay, you know what? We're in the United States. But one of the voices that's the most kind of notorious for this kind of anti-American posturing is Ward Churchill, right? Ward Churchill, leading Native American scholar, and many people have come out and said he's not actually Native American, and I don't want to open that can of worms, but he pushes the line that like the American people are guilty of the crimes of imperialism. They're Euro settlers who benefit from empire and such. Well, if you look into his record, that's a lot of bluster. That's a lot of bombast, right? But he's a collaborator with American imperialism. He went to Nicaragua with the CIA and took up a gun against the Sandinistas. Um, yeah, hating America is the least useful method for organization. How can one organize the masses when you hate one of the few things that they almost live universally? Yeah, most people think the flag represents them, right? So if you light something on fire, it's like you're dissing their favorite sports team or something. They're like, that's our flag, and I am an American. So if you're saying I hate America or you're burning the American flag, they just say it like you're saying F you to me, and they don't want to hear you, right? I don't know, it's kind of juvenile. So there you go. Alrighty. In the Clinton administration, there was somebody known as Lady Taliban who was lobbying the Taliban government. Yeah, that's true. I heard about that. And I mean, it didn't work, right? The Taliban didn't ultimately cooperate with the United States around the oil pipeline like they wanted them to. Younger folks in Eastern Europe increasingly having a negative view of communism. Well, In my experience, that's largely because it's the older folks who are identified with communism, and they grow up hearing the older folks talk about the good old days. Well, back in communism, and they get sick of it, right? And they view communism as this kind of stodgy, old, conservative, old person thing. I mean, many people say the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is the party of the pensioners, of the retired people. But that's the exact opposite of what we hear in the United States. In the United States, it's the opposite. We're constantly told every time I would tell people I was a communist. I was in college, I'd say I was a communist. People would say, but haven't you ever talked to anyone who actually lived under communism? And I would show them poll after poll after poll in Romania and Czechoslovakia and in Russia. Soviet nostalgia, the people who actually lived under it, the old people, the ones who actually lived under it, are the ones who like it. It's just the most arrogant statement. Haven't you ever talked to someone who actually lived under it? Yeah, and I've actually seen polls by people who actually. I mean, it's the most arrogant. They assume that everyone who ever lived under it would hate it. Well, that's not true. And in fact, in the Eastern Europe, the folks that are the most negative on it are the younger people who are looking at their iPhones. Those young kids with their iPhones, they might not know where they're going. They might bump into somebody when they're walking down the street if they're looking at that phone too much. I think they should put that phone away while they're walking down the road and look both ways when they cross the street. And those young kids with their rap music, they don't like the Soviet Union very. I'm just kidding, but no, but but no, it tends to be the younger kids who are sick of hearing their grandparents go on and on about the good old days, and they identify communism with old people and stuff. And on top of that, they then, they're very enamored with Western media and with, social media and, with, social media, Facebook, Twitter, and all of that. So because they're enamored with social media, and because they're enamored with social media, and because they're sick of hearing about the past from older folks, they might have a less positive view. But that will change. Years ago I met somebody from Belarus, and she had been a protester against Lukashenko when she was in college. But then as she got older and she, came to understand, how Belarus had not been through the horrors that the rest of the Eastern Bloc had been through after the fall of the Soviet Union, and she began to see the United States in more negative light, she became sympathetic to Lukashenko. But when she was a college student, right, when she was in her early 20s and she was going to college, there's a lot of problems in Belarus. There are a lot of problems in Belarus, and there's corruption. There's a lot of social conservatism. That's a very anti-LGBT atmosphere. It's much more socially conservative than the rest of the former Soviet Union, I would say. And she was frustrated about a number of things. There's corruption, etc. And so she was in college. She was mad about that. And, she was not seeing things in a global context. She was seeing things in terms of, I live here and I'm young and I want things to change. And she was right, but then as she got older, she realized that Belarus, Lukashenko, he was resisting domination of the West, that in a lot of ways they benefited, and so she changed her mind. And and there's a lot of, I've met, in Iran, I met younger folks who had been part of the Green movement that had protested, after Ahmadinejad was elected and been part of the protests, who then, after a couple years, they realized that was not good. And that yeah, in a lot of cases, the color revolutions they capture the emotions and the naivete of the kind of younger folks, the wealthier younger folks in anti-imperialist countries who are enamored with Western capitalism. They like the glitz, right? They like the Disney, they like the sparkle and the glitter of Western capitalism. And they identify the anti-imperialist government, whether it's Belarus or Iran or Venezuela, they identify that with older folks, with whatever they're mad about. They want their country to be exciting and new, like Western media and stuff. And they don't quite get it. And they're young too. They haven't been out on their own. They haven't had to pay their own bills, right? And they're going to college for free, and they're, living off their parents, and they don't, but then when they get out in the real world and they're like, oh wow, we have guaranteed health care here. They don't have that in other countries. Oh wow, we have a guaranteed job here. They don't have that in other countries. Oh wow, they start to realize the benefits of their country and its anti-imperialism. And that it used to be that it was Marxists and leftists who hijacked the youthful feelings of rebellion. But now, actually, you could argue that the imperialists have kind of hijacked that. But that's a whole nother conversation. All right, differences between MLM and Maoism. Well, here's the thing. MLM refers to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, right? And in China, the ruling ideology is Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory. And even before Mao died, it never said Maoism in the Chinese constitution. It said Marxism, Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought, right? So MLM is not a thing. MLM is it's a political movement. Maoism and MLM, they don't talk about Maoism in China. They talk about Mao Zedong thought. Mao himself never talked about Maoism. He talked about Mao Zedong thought. So there's Mao Zedong thought, right, it's just, the teachings of Mao. It's Marxism, Leninism applied to China, certain methods for dealing with things. And then Marxism, Leninism, Maoism is a political current that emerged after Mao died, when various communist parties around the world denounced Deng Xiaoping in China, the Shining Path in Peru, the Naxals in India, some groups in the Philippines, the Revolutionary Communist Party of the United States, the Bobavakian people. It's a very small political current around the world. They exist, and it's generally in developing countries, and it's a much bigger thing in Southeast Asia. There tend to be groups in There's a couple Maoist MLM groups in Bangladesh. There's some in there's the Naxals in India, etc. But it's an ultra leftist current. The MLM current generally rejects the brilliance of Mao. Mao was a genius. He's going to be remembered on the level of like a Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, or he's going to be remembered as a pivotal figure in world history. But the reason for that is he was a tactical genius. He knew how to make alliances. He knew how to organize people. He knew how to find strategies to kind of capture people's imaginations. And he knew how to capture, the energy of what was already kind of happening in the country. That was Mao. Mao was brilliant in that sense. But these folks, they like Mao because he had a gun. They like the violence part. They like the People's War. They like, the aesthetics. They like the Cultural Revolution and the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. And they like Mao, because they like violence and they like destruction, and they don't really get the essence of Mao's brilliance. If you read On Contradiction, if you read Talk on the Question of Philosophy, and the CPI manual, we have 2 essays by Mao that are important, that are deeply important in political education. The CPI manual, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual, I included the texts that are key in educating people. Like if I'm trying to teach someone to think like a communist, I would give them these texts. Well, there's 2 Mao texts in there, and one is called Talk on the Question of Philosophy. And that essay, it's brilliant. And the other is called Report on the Hunan Province. And it's also brilliant. And it's like Mao had a method of thinking and a way of relating to people and talking to people that is genial. It's genius. The MLM current, they just think Mao, he killed people, he had a gun, violence, tear it down, liberation. They like kind of the aesthetics and the emotions of Mao, but they don't really understand the brilliance of Mao. And, I would argue that, as much as I have learned a lot from Mao, I'm very critical of Mao. The Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. That was an awful thing that he did. The Cultural Revolution hurt China. It was not a good thing to do. The Gang of Four, when he kind of had them running the country and was aligning with the U.S. imperialists, denouncing the Soviet Union, that was very, very problematic. Mao is a complex figure. I'm not a Maoist, right? I am a socialist. I am somebody who wants to learn from what Mao did. I want to study Mao's methods and see if there's anything I can utilize to help build socialism in America. But and that's the approach. We should have this approach with Marx. We should have this approach with Lenin. We should have this approach with all the leaders throughout the 20th century. Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, right? All of them. Study all of them. Learn what they did well. Learn what they didn't do very well. Study all of it, but blindly follow none of it. That's my attitude, right? And so I'm not a Maoist. And I wouldn't call myself that, because to be a Maoist in the United States would be meaningless. This is not China in the 1930s. We don't have a peasantry. We're not waging people's war and carving out liberated territory. We're not entering a strategic alliance with the KMT. We're not boycotting Japanese goods. I'm sorry, that's not what we're doing in this time. If you call yourself a Maoist in the United States, you're LARPing, okay? You're LARPing, right? You can learn from Mao, and you should, That's why you should read what he actually said, right? And read official histories of the Communist Party of China. Learn the methods, the brilliance of Mao. Learn who Mao was, right? Read Wind in the Tower by Han Suyin, and read various you study all of this, but don't blindly follow any of it. Don't blindly follow any of it, because again, and to call yourself a Maoist in the United States means nothing. It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It means nothing. It means you're pretending to be something you're not, right? At the end of the day, we should be obsessively studying American history and figuring out how we fit into it, right? Because if you're serious about making a revolution in America, you want to make America a socialist country, you need to know America like the back of your hand. And that's not what you want to hear. That's not exciting, right? You turned to communist politics because you were disgusted with this country, and you want to do something different, right? I understand that, but if you really want to see socialism in America, you need to understand America better than anybody. You need to be an expert on American class struggle history. Yeah, you need to know the history of the Communist Party, the history of the Socialist Party, the history of the 1960s political movement, it's 1970s new communist movement. You need to know that stuff better than anybody, and you need to be looking through that, and you need to know the different aspects of this country. I mean, look, I grew up in an area where there were like 2 Mormon kids at my school, right? That was it, right? Mormonism was not a big deal. But if you go to Idaho, if you go to Utah, you go to Oregon, you go to Washington State, you go to Arizona, Mormonism is a really big deal, and it's a big part of American culture is Mormonism, right? It's top religion among FBI and CIA. I realized, 4 or 5 years ago, I knew nothing about Mormonism. So I got a biography of Joseph Smith, and I started listening to Mormon lectures. And now I feel like, even though I would never become a Mormon, it's certainly not my religious beliefs. If you're going to understand America, you need to understand the Mormons. You need to understand Mormonism. And what is Mormonism about, right? Mormonism is not like and New England, right? I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, right? My father's from the South, but I grew up in the Midwest. So I knew the South a little bit. I got a taste of the South from my father. I knew to some degree. Have you read John Marco Allegro, the anthropologist? I have not read him. I have not. And I knew the Midwest where I grew up, but now I'm living in New York, which is kind of sort of New England. And the New England cultural influence, Boston, and the Quakerism, and the New England planter, and Thomas Paine, and I mean not Thomas Paine, Henry David Thoreau, and I mean there's a lot, New England's culture again is very different, right? And there's a lot of very liberal small towns all throughout Massachusetts, right? Like small towns in Vermont and Massachusetts, they're small towns, but the people there are overwhelmingly liberal. That's not how I grew up. In the Midwest, the small towns are all deeply conservative. Again, it's a different culture. There's like small towns full of like liberal, intellectual kind of people, right? And that, again, this country is very diverse. Texas, right? Texas. I had an uncle who lived in Texas. Texas is very, I mean, one state, and Texas is like, there's 5 different cultures in Texas practically, right? And if you're serious, if you want to make the USA a socialist country, you need to study this country like the back of your hand. You need to know different regions, and you need to go to different parts of the country. I don't know enough about that situation. I really, I really don't know enough about it, Jared. I mean, if I want to give you an answer that's like thorough enough. So, there you go. I mean, so I can't answer that. But yeah, if you're serious, you need to study the history of this country. You really do, right? I mean, as much as you need to study the history of the communist movement and the history of revolutionary movements around the world, you need to know America. You really need to know America. So there you go. And on that note, I'm going to end it here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night. Good night.